Hi guys, welcome back again to my channel. I am Grace, and on this channel right here we create a lot of DIY sewing related videos which go hand in hand with my sewing pattern store BG patterns. So in today's video guys, I'll be showing you how I transformed or upcycled this chiffon shirt into a halter neck top. So this is the final result after my upcycling, and I absolutely love it. So if you're interested in getting this pattern, the link will always be in the description box for you to check out, or in the comment section. So this is a halter neck top with a princess seam, keyhole detailing at the center, a mandarin collar with a button at the back, and a center back zip to put this dress on easily. So I would recommend using a light to medium weight fabric when making this project. So let's just jump right into the video for today. So here are some of the things you'll be needing to create this project right here. So let's just jump right into the video. But prior to me actually sewing these, I decided to take out the buttons and just recycle the buttons. I ended up using one of the buttons for the back of the collar and kept the rest. And after cutting out the buttons from the shirt, I went ahead to cut out the front pieces on both sides, and that is what I'm going to use to cut out my side front piece and my center back and side back bodice. So after cutting them out, I placed them having them mirror each other, so that is having right sides facing together, and I just placed the patterns on the green lines and just cut them out. So working with this fabric was quite tricky because it's a chiffon fabric and it's quite shifty, so you need to place something on it if you decide to work with a fabric like this. So for the center front, I folded the piece into two and cut it out at the center front right there. So these are the front pieces, and what I'm going to do is to sew the side front and the center front pieces together. So you're going to place them having right sides together and sew it down using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're going to pretty much repeat the same step to the lining as well. So I started sewing from the bottom to the top now, especially when I'm sewing like contoured areas like the front bust areas, and it has been working so well for me, so I do not necessarily have to pin them down. And yeah, so now for the back pieces, you're going to place right sides of both the center back and side back pieces together and sew it down using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to repeat the same step with the lining. So after sewing everything down, you're going to create clipping notches around the curve of the top or the bust area. So now you're just going to sew the back bodice and the front bodice pieces together, and you're going to pin them at the side seam, aligning the notches first before pinning the rest down, and just sewing it down using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to repeat the same step to the lining. Okay, so after sewing the back and the front bodice piece together, this is what you'll have. And now we're going to sew the lining and the main fabric pieces together, and you're going to start off by placing right sides together, and then you're going to pin the keyhole area together in place and just sew it all around using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you go ahead to pin the sides as well, but I decided to just pin all of them all at once to just make my whole sewing process easy. So after pinning the keyhole, you're going to sew it down, so I'm just pinning the side as well. So when you get to the center back, you're going to go inwards by a 1/4 inch and just mark it right there and pin it there, and that is where you're going to stop sewing at, because you're going to want to insert your zip at the center back and you need that space opened. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like after you're done pinning everything, and you're going to sew till you get to that mark there and you're stopping at that mark. So when sewing the keyhole area, you need to pivot it as you go. This was sped up, so I really did to take my time there. So after sewing the keyhole area and the sides, you're just going to create clipping notches around the curve there to just make it look neater when you turn this right sides out. So after doing that, the next step is to just turn this right side out, and after turning it right side out, you're going to iron it, then understitch the line into the seam allowance at the side and as well as the keyhole area. So now we're going to start off with the collar piece, and you're going to fuse an interface into the lining part of the collar piece, and you're going to infuse it to the wrong side of the lining. So after fusing the interface into the lining, you're going to sew the right side of the main fabric and the right side of the lining pieces together. Place them together rather, and pin it down on the sides and the top of the collar, and sew it using a 1/2 inch seam allowance while leaving the bottom part of the collar open, because you are going to that is where you are going to insert the neckline of the top too. So after sewing that down, you're going to just clip the edges and create notches around the curve of the collar, and that is also just going to make it, look neat when you turn it around. And you can go ahead to trim off some of the seam allowance, but this part is totally optional. I just did it to have a less bulky look at the top of the collar after turning it right sides out. Okay, so after trimming off all the seam allowance I needed to trim off, I just decided to turn it right sides out. Yeah, and just poke the edges with like a blunt pointy edge so you don't end up tearing the fabric. And this is what you should have. So before we actually sew the collar to the top of the neckline, to the neckline of the top rather, we're going to create the keyhole. And in order for you to do that, you're going to overlap one edge of the top to the other edge with about 1/4 inch, and just hand stitch that in place. So now we're going to actually sew the collar to the neckline, and I initially wanted to sew the main fabric to the neckline rather than the lining, but I accidentally sewed the lining, and to be honest I didn't see much of a difference. So I would just recommend you do either one that suits you, and just pin it to the neckline and sew it down using the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after doing that, you're just going to create notches around the curve of the sewn area. So now we're going to want to top stitch this, but before we do that, I'm going to pin the top part of the collar, and the reason why I'm doing that is because the fabric is a bit difficult to work with without pinning the top first. So I just pin the top first before having to pin the bottom part and sew it down in place. Okay, so now that we've pinned the top, we're just going to fold the rough edges of both the main fabric and the lining collar piece, and just fold it inward to hide it away and just pin it down. I like to start from the center, then just work my way to both sides. Okay, so now that we're done pinning everything, this is what you will have, and you're just going to top stitch it all around, as you can see me indicating with my hand. So now we're going to insert the zip to the center back of the bodice, and what you're going to do is to just open it up and pin the side of the zip that needs to go to the right side of the zip, and just place right side of the zip to the right side of the main fabric and just baste it in place. And you're only basting the zip to the main fabric, you aren't going to baste it to the lining at all. Okay, after you're done basting it, this is what you have, and you're just going to overlap the lining on top of that. So basically the zip is going to be in between the main fabric and the lining, and you're going to pin that in place, and you're just going to sew the zip to the lining and the main fabric together. So after doing that, you're just going to cut off the zip you do not need anymore, because you're supposed to use like at least a short zip, but I didn't have that for the color I needed, so I had to work with whatever I had, which was this zip right here. So I'm cutting it off. After doing that, you're just going to turn this right side out first to just be sure that everything looks neat before going on with the next step. Okay, so now that I'm okay with everything, I'm just going to pretty much trim off the frayed edges, and I'm just going to go ahead to turn this wrong sides out. So now I'm just going to turn this, having the wrong sides facing upwards or facing me. I'm pretty much going to have the right side of the lining and the main fabric facing each other, and I'm going to pin the hem of the top in place. After pinning everything, you're going to pretty much sew the hem down using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So pretty much sew from one side to this point. When you get to the center, you leave an opening, then you sew again, and you're going to do this using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. After doing that, I'm just going to trim off about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I meant you sew this using 3/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, then I'm just going to turn this right side out. After turning the right side out, you're just going to iron the top and pin the hem, and just top stitch the hem of the top, and your top is pretty much good to go. So this is the final result, and I absolutely love it. And like I said at the beginning, I made this using 2 different fabrics. I made one in the chiffon, which is what I sewed with throughout this entire video, and I made another one in a crepe fabric, which is this pink crepe fabric, and both of them turned out beautifully. So thank you so much for watching, and if you're interested in getting this pattern, the link is going to be in the description box for you to check out, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.